The woman my son never knew. I never told my son about my $40,000 monthly salary, even though he always saw me living a simple life. To Marcus, I was just Mom, the woman who woke up before dawn, brewed her coffee in silence, and disappeared into the city every morning. He never knew that behind those quiet commutes, I led boardroom meetings that shaped companies, negotiated contracts worth more than his mortgage, and had people twice his age waiting for my approval. But I never corrected him. I let him believe I was ordinary, because humility had raised me higher than any title ever could. Still, that Tuesday afternoon call unsettled me. "Mom," Marcus said, voice tight, "Simone's parents are visiting from France. They want to meet you. We're having dinner Saturday night at the Aurelia Grand." I smiled into the phone. "That sounds lovely." Then came the hesitation. "I told them you live alone, that you're simple. Modest. I just don't want them to misunderstand." There it was. Simple. The word landed like a blade wrapped in silk. I paused for a moment, swallowing the ache that rose in my chest. "All right, Marcus," I said quietly. "I'll be there." When I hung up, I stared around my apartment. The same leather sofa I'd had for 15 years, the old lamp with a crooked shade, the framed photo of Marcus as a child missing a front tooth. Everything was plain, yes, but it had been a choice. A life lived in silence, not poverty. That Saturday I dressed simply. Beige cardigan, old purse, my hair tied in a loose bun. I even took the bus instead of my car. I wanted to see how they'd treat someone they thought had nothing to offer. The dinner. The restaurant was elegant. All glass walls and golden light. The hostess looked me up and down before forcing a polite smile. "Reservation under Marcus Hale," I said. Her eyebrows lifted slightly, but she led me to a table in the center. Marcus stood up, visibly nervous. Simone's parents, Alain and Colette, smiled thinly, their eyes darting over my clothes, my shoes, the handbag that had seen better days. Simone herself avoided my gaze. "Mom," Marcus said. "This is Simone's father, Alain, and her mother, Colette." I shook hands. "Pleasure to meet you." Colette's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Marcus tells us you work in an office. That must be steady." "Steady," I echoed with a nod. "Yes, it keeps me busy." Throughout dinner, they spoke about their travels, their vineyard in Bordeaux, their friends in important places. I mostly listened. When the waiter came with the wine list, Alain waved a dismissive hand at me. "This one's quite expensive, perhaps something lighter for her," he told the waiter with a wink. I simply smiled. But when the maitre d' suddenly approached our table and stopped beside me, the room shifted. "Mrs. Hale," he said warmly. "What an honor. I didn't know you were joining us tonight." Simone's parents froze. Marcus looked confused. "Do you know her?" he asked. The maitre d' nodded. "Of course. Mrs. Hale was one of our key investors during the renovation of this restaurant. The wine cellar downstairs is named after her." The table fell silent. Simone dropped her fork. Alain blinked rapidly, searching for words. "Investor," Marcus repeated slowly. I looked at him, my voice calm but firm. "Yes. I've been investing in this chain for nearly a decade. It's part of what I do when I'm not working in an office." Colette's face turned pale. "You never told us." "Because it wasn't necessary," I said softly. "I wanted to see how you treated someone you believed was beneath you." I turned to Marcus. "And you, my son. I never told you about the life I built because I wanted you to value people, not possessions. But tonight you showed me something else, shame. And that's something money can't fix." Marcus lowered his gaze, tears welling up in his eyes. "Mom, I didn't mean to." "I know," I interrupted. "But maybe it's time you finally saw me for who I am." The truth revealed. The maitre d' offered me a private table, but I declined. I wanted to finish what had been started. I paid the entire bill. 5 courses, top-shelf wine, the best dessert on the menu, and signed it with my corporate card. Alain's jaw clenched when he saw the name on the card. Evelyn Hale, Senior Vice President, Global Operations, Norcrest International. As we stood to leave, Colette murmured, "You must forgive us, we didn't know." I smiled politely. People rarely do. I walked out of the restaurant into the cool night air. My steps steady, my heart strangely light. Behind me, Marcus followed silently. When he caught up, he said in a trembling voice. Mom, why didn't you ever tell me? I looked at him, my grown son, still that boy who wanted to fit in. Because, Marcus, I wanted you to grow up proud of your character, not your comfort. But maybe I failed at that. He shook his head, ashamed. No, Mom. I failed. That night, as I returned to my modest apartment, I finally allowed myself to cry. Not from sadness but from relief. Because I had lived my truth in silence for too long. And sometimes silence must end, not to prove wealth but to reclaim dignity. That night after dinner, Marcus didn't call. And I didn't expect him to. The truth has a strange way of creating distance before it builds understanding. For 35 years I had protected him from the weight of my world, and for the first time he had seen it all in one night. The polished surface beneath the quiet mother. The power hidden behind ordinary clothes. Days passed. The house was still. I went to work, attended meetings, approved budgets, and flew back home on Friday evening. All the while wondering if Marcus would ever understand why I had chosen simplicity over show. On Sunday morning my phone rang. It was him. Mom, can we talk? Of course, I said, though my heart beat faster. When he arrived, I could tell he hadn't slept much. His eyes were red, his hands restless. He walked into my small kitchen, the same one where he'd done his homework as a boy, and sat across from me. I was stupid, he began. I was embarrassed by how simple you lived. Simone's parents kept talking about money, about family background, and I thought, if I told them the truth they'd think I was exaggerating. Or worse, they'd judge me for not being like you. I listened in silence. Then when I saw the way they treated you, I realized how small I'd become. You sat there with so much grace, Mom. You didn't need to defend yourself. The truth did it for you. I smiled softly. Marcus, people's values are revealed when they think no one is watching. Yours too. He nodded, his voice trembling. Simone was horrified. Her parents apologized, but she can't even look me in the eye. She said she never knew what kind of woman raised me. I looked down at my hands. Maybe she will, if you let her see you change. The visit. A week later, Simone came to see me. Alone. Her confidence was gone, replaced by something fragile, guilt maybe. Mrs. Hale, she began. I wanted to apologize. I was part of that night. I didn't stop them. I was afraid of how they'd judge me if I defended you. Her voice broke. But when the maitre d' recognized you, when everyone stood a little straighter, I realized you didn't change. You were the same woman from the moment you walked in, calm, dignified, kind. I've never felt so small. I reached across the table and touched her hand gently. Simone, class isn't defined by money. It's defined by behavior when you believe no one is keeping score. She nodded, tears falling. I'd like to learn that from you, if you'd let me. The shift. Months passed. Simone began visiting often. She'd help me cook, ask about my work, about investments, about life. And Marcus, he changed too. He stopped hiding behind appearances. They sold their luxury car, moved to a smaller home, and started saving for their child's education instead of impressing others. One evening, over dinner, Marcus looked at me and said, You know, Mom, I finally understand why you lived the way you did. You weren't poor. You were free. I smiled. That's the secret, Marcus. Simplicity isn't about what you lack. It's about what you no longer need to prove. The full circle. A year later, Marcus invited me again, this time to his home. It was Simone's birthday, and the dining table was set simply, beautifully. No show, no pretenses. Just laughter, music, family. When it was time for a toast, Marcus stood and raised his glass. To my mother, he said. The woman who taught me that silence can be louder than applause, and that dignity doesn't need decoration. Everyone clinked glasses, and for the first time in years, I felt something settle quietly in my heart. That night, when I went home, I looked around my modest apartment again. Same furniture, same worn leather bag on the chair. But everything felt different. Because finally, they didn't just see me as the simple woman who worked in an office. They saw me as I was, strong, patient, unshaken. The woman my son finally knew. 10 years had passed since that night at the restaurant. The night that stripped away masks, pride, and pretense, and left only truth. Marcus and Simone had built a quieter, stronger life together. They had a daughter now, Lily, a curious 9-year-old with bright eyes and 1,000 questions. She reminded me of Marcus when he was little, only braver, less afraid of asking why. I was retired by then. I had left the boardroom behind, donated most of my wealth to education programs for girls in underprivileged areas, and kept only what I needed to live comfortably. The days were slower, the air lighter. But my story wasn't over yet, because Lily had begun to notice things. The discovery. One afternoon while visiting me, Lily was playing with an old box of papers I kept under the desk. "Grandma, what's this?" she asked, holding up a folder of old business cards and letters. I smiled. "Those? Just old memories, sweetheart." She read one aloud, sounding out the words carefully. "Evelyn Hale, Senior Vice President, Norcrest International." Her eyes widened. "Wait, Grandma, you were a boss?" I laughed softly. "Something like that." She frowned. "But Dad said you worked in an office." Marcus. Even after all these years, he still told the story gently, sparing the details. I took Lily's hand and sat her beside me. "I did work in an office. But sometimes even in small rooms people make big decisions." She looked at me curiously. "So you were rich?" I thought for a moment, then said, "I was wealthy. But the real richness, Lily, wasn't in money. It was in knowing who I was, even when others didn't." The truth passed on. That evening, Marcus and Simone came to pick her up. Lily ran to them, shouting, "Dad, Grandma was a boss. Like a real one." Marcus froze, glancing at me with a smile that carried both embarrassment and pride. "So she found out," I said, laughing. He nodded. "It was bound to happen." Later, when Lily was asleep, Marcus and I sat in the living room. "She should know everything," he said quietly. "Not just about your career, about your choices. About how you lived." I looked at him, the man my son had become. No longer ashamed of simplicity. No longer chasing approval. "Then tell her, Marcus." "But not to impress her, to guide her." He smiled. "You know, sometimes I still think about that dinner night. It changed everything for me." I nodded. "For all of us." The full circle. A few months later, Lily's school invited me to speak for Women's History Week. I almost declined. I had never been one for the spotlight. But Marcus insisted. "Mom," he said, "it's time they hear your story from you." So I went. Standing before a room full of students, I spoke not about power or salaries or corporate success, but about silence. True strength, I told them, isn't always loud. Sometimes it's in quiet persistence, in dignity when no one's watching, in doing what's right even when it's unseen. After the applause faded, I saw Lily standing at the back of the room, clapping harder than anyone. She ran to me and threw her arms around my waist. "Grandma," she whispered, "when I grow up I want to be just like you." And for the first time in years I felt tears slip down my face. Not from pride but from peace. Because in that moment, I knew my silence had finally spoken loud enough for the next generation to hear. It's been 5 years since my mother passed away. And yet every morning when I walk into my office, I still hear her voice, calm, measured, wise. True power doesn't shout, Marcus. It whispers, and the wise listen. The letter and the lesson. After her funeral, Simone and I spent days sorting through her things. In one of her desk drawers we found another envelope. Yellowed, sealed with wax, with my name written in her neat handwriting. Inside was a single page. "Marcus, if you're reading this, it means my silence has ended. But remember, silence is not emptiness. It's space for thought, for listening, for becoming. Don't let the noise of the world drown out who you truly are. Keep what is simple, protect what is good, and never forget where strength is born. In quiet hearts that never stop believing." Simone cried as she read it aloud. And I realized she hadn't just raised me. She had raised us all. The next generation. Lily is 16 now. And she's exactly like her grandmother, stubborn, brilliant, and endlessly curious. Last week she came to me with a school project. "Dad, I have to write about the most inspiring woman in my life." I smiled. "You're going to write about your mom?" She shook her head. "No. About Grandma Evelyn." She turned her laptop toward me, and I saw the title on her screen. "The Woman Who Hid Her Crown." In her essay she wrote about the night her grandmother was underestimated, the choices she made, the life she built without fanfare. And at the end, she wrote something that made my throat tighten. Some people show the world their strength by shouting. My grandmother showed hers by being quiet. And now her silence speaks through me. The commemoration. Months later, Lily's essay won an international youth writing competition. She was invited to give a short speech at a global event for women in leadership, the same kind of place my mother used to walk into with calm authority. On stage, Lily wore a simple white dress and no jewelry, just a small silver pin that had belonged to my mother. My grandmother taught me that dignity doesn't need decoration, she said into the microphone. She built an empire no one saw, and a legacy everyone feels. And though she's gone, her whisper still guides us, to be kind, to be strong, and to never mistake silence for weakness. The hall went silent. Then came the applause, not thunderous but long, deep, respectful. The kind of applause that means people understood. 30 years had passed since that night in the restaurant. The night that changed everything, for me, for my mother, and for every woman who learned that silence could be strength. Lily is 40 now. She's no longer the curious little girl who once found my mother's business cards in a dusty box. She's the director of the Evelyn Foundation, a name that now means something in every corner of the world. The foundation has built schools, funded startups led by young women, and created mentorship programs across continents. On the wall of every office, framed in silver, hangs a photo of my mother, Evelyn Hale, smiling gently, her eyes steady, calm, knowing. And under that photo, the same words she lived by. True power doesn't shout. The anniversary. On the 30th anniversary of her passing, the foundation held a ceremony in her honor. People from all over the world came, leaders, former employees, students whose lives had changed because of her name. Lily stood at the podium, her voice steady but emotional. My grandmother never sought fame, she said. She built a life not to impress but to inspire. She taught us that grace is the highest form of power, and that humility leaves the deepest mark. Behind her on the giant screen, a video played, old photos of Evelyn, in her modest apartment, in business meetings, cooking with Marcus as a child, walking through the city with that same quiet composure. People cried, not because she was gone but because they felt like they knew her. Marcus's reflection. As I sat there among the crowd, I realized something. The story of my mother had become larger than I ever imagined. Once I had been ashamed of her simplicity. Now I lived in the shadow of her greatness, not the kind that demands recognition, but the kind that plants seeds quietly and lets others bloom. When the ceremony ended, I was asked to say a few words. I walked to the stage slowly, the lights soft on my face, and looked at the sea of faces before me. My mother never raised her voice, I began. She didn't need to, because her life spoke louder than words ever could. I used to think silence meant weakness. Now I know it means wisdom. The audience was silent, the kind of silence that holds respect, not emptiness. If she were here today, I continued, she'd tell you that true strength isn't about power over others, but peace within yourself. And that every act of kindness, no matter how small, is louder than any speech. Quiet visit. After the event, I went to visit her grave again. It was a quiet evening. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft gold, her favorite color. I placed fresh lilies beside her stone. And next to them I set a framed photo of Lily standing on that stage, her grandmother's silver pin on her lapel. You see, Mom, I whispered. Your whisper became a voice, and now it speaks to the world. A small breeze brushed across my face. I closed my eyes and smiled, knowing it was her. The legacy lives. Years later, Lily's daughter, my granddaughter, would grow up hearing bedtime stories not about princesses or castles, but about the woman who hid her crown. One night, she asked, Dad, why did great-grandma hide her crown? Lily smiled. Because real queens don't need to wear one to be seen. 100 years after Evelyn Hale's death, the city she once walked through had changed beyond recognition. Skyscrapers reached higher, cars flew soundlessly between towers, and screens glowed with endless noise. Yet in a corner of the city library, a small exhibit remained untouched by time. Evelyn Hale, The Power of Silence. It wasn't large. Just a single glass case containing her worn leather handbag, a faded photograph, and a notebook filled with neat, careful handwriting. Every year, students from across the world visited it. Some came because of history assignments, others because of curiosity, but a few came looking for something deeper. a reminder that meaning still existed beneath the noise. The young visitor. One afternoon, a girl named Arya, 14 years old, stood in front of that display. Her mother was a journalist, her father a politician. Both spoke loudly, always rushing. But Arya had never liked noise. She preferred quiet corners, notebooks, and questions no one else asked aloud. She read the inscription beneath the photo. "True power doesn't shout." Arya whispered the words, testing them in her mouth like a secret. They felt right. The curator, an elderly woman with kind eyes, noticed her. "Do you know who she was?" Arya shook her head. "Only that she helped people." The woman smiled. "She didn't just help them, dear. She taught them. She proved that a whisper can travel further than a scream, if it's honest." That night, Arya went home and searched everything she could about Evelyn Hale. She found recordings of Lily's speeches, Marcus's foundation, old interviews, archived letters. And by midnight, she wrote her first essay titled The Quiet Revolution. The circle reopens. Months later, Arya's essay won the Global Youth Voices Award, the same prize Lily had won a century earlier. When she stood on the stage to speak, her voice trembled, but her words were steady. Evelyn Hale lived in a time before anyone cared about quiet strength. She changed her family, her community, and then the world, not by shouting but by being. Maybe power isn't about being the loudest in the room. Maybe it's about being the one who listens and still chooses kindness. When she stepped down from the stage, cameras flashed and applause filled the hall. But Arya didn't smile for the fame. She smiled because she knew the woman in the photograph, though long gone, had just spoken again through her. The endless whisper. That night, a storm swept across the city. The lights flickered in the museum, but the display case remained untouched. Inside, Evelyn's leather handbag glowed faintly in the emergency light. Her words, "True power doesn't shout," reflected in the glass like a whisper carried forward by time. And somewhere beyond the sound of the rain, in the hearts of those who had listened, the whisper continued, softer than wind, stronger than memory. The world had changed in ways Evelyn Hale could never have imagined, but her words still lived quietly between the noise of progress. On the anniversary of her birth, the United Nations hosted a global broadcast called Voices That Changed Humanity. Among names carved into history, scientists, leaders, inventors, one name stood apart. Not because of the power she held, but because of the silence she mastered. Evelyn Hale, the woman who hid her crown. The broadcast. The screen faded from images of towering cities to a simple black and white photograph. Evelyn in her modest cardigan, standing by a window with sunlight spilling across her face. The narrator's voice filled the hall, soft yet strong. She was not born to command armies or rule nations. She was born to remind us that the quietest people often carry the loudest truths. Evelyn Hale never built monuments, she built minds. She never demanded applause, she earned respect. And though she spoke little, her whisper became a movement. The audience, thousands of faces from every continent, sat in silence. And in that moment the world felt still again, just as it had the night she first revealed who she really was. A voice from the future. In the front row sat Arya, now grown, a renowned educator and writer. She had spent her life teaching Evelyn's philosophy in schools, reminding the new generation that the most powerful revolutions begin in the human heart. When she was invited to give the closing words, she walked slowly to the stage, looked at the camera, and spoke. A century ago, one woman lived quietly, loved deeply, and led silently. She didn't chase fame. She didn't crave power. She simply was true, kind, strong. And because of that, the world learned that leadership doesn't always wear a crown. Sometimes it wears humility. Her voice cracked slightly. And today, as we carry her legacy into a louder world, may we remember her lesson. That true power doesn't shout. It listens. It builds. It endures. The audience rose to their feet. But Arya didn't bow. She just smiled, the same quiet smile Evelyn had once worn, and whispered into the microphone. "Thank you, Grandma." The final scene. As the broadcast faded, the camera panned slowly across the night sky. Lights from millions of homes shimmered below, and Evelyn's voice, preserved from an old interview, played one last time. "If one person remembers that dignity is louder than pride, then I've done enough." The screen turned black. Soft piano music began to play. And white text appeared, the story's final message.